definitely. So let's start off with this idea of the 3 Rs. I know in my own coaching education, particularly, this was an idea that I was presented in the UK while I was doing some qualifications over there. First time I'd seen this idea was through various experts. But for me, the 3 Rs are a really good start point. And I think the image on the right is an important one for people to consider as they work their way through the content that we'll present and start to try and translate that back to their own environment. So Dan, from your perspective, what value do the 3 Rs present?
So really important for us in terms of the enhanced learning piece. So if we think about repetition, it's really important to address here is when we ask how often does the player get to repeat the action or interaction in your session, is we're looking at their opportunity to repeat solving the problem. So often we talk about repeating the technical execution of an ideal model that's prescribed by us as a coach or as a teacher. Hey, this is exactly how we want you to pass the ball, exactly how we want you to catch or dribble with the ball. Whereas when we talk about repetition, we're actually talking about repetition of solving the problem. And so that's where the idea of repetition without repetition comes in, that we'll discuss a little bit later. So I think that's a really important piece to address when it comes to repetition on this slide. How about you? What jumps out to you with realism and relevance?
Well, first of all, I think this is, you'll see this further in the presentation, but this question has to underpin what we do. What is our session design? What are the outcomes we're looking to achieve within our session design? So realism for me is fundamental around, does it look like the game? This is a big question. If the action or interaction that we're putting on within a session is not realistic to what the players are going to experience, either in different parts of training or, of course, more importantly on game day, then there's got to be questions asked. Now, we'll talk about how we can dial up and down the practice spectrum in due course and where that kind of fits. For me, the other thing is the image on this slide is really important. Now, I'm not a DJ, Dan. I don't know how many times you've stood behind the decks and tried your hand, but the idea of dialing up the treble and bass as an example, for me, is a critical one in terms of getting your head around the 3 Rs. And when we talk about the practice spectrum shortly, because often there is a trade-off. And when we go up in one area, for example, realism, we might go down in repetition. And as Dan alluded to, that's not meaning that repetition without repetition won't exist and that we won't repeat certain moments, but it might be dialed down. So that's kind of how I see that realism versus repetition piece. And I think the image is quite powerful. For you, where does relevance come into this? And in terms of your thinking around designing sessions, and why is it important?
It's where I begin all session designs with who is in front of me. And that's where relevance really sits at the heart of answering that question. So the position they play, the stage of their development, like we've got on the screen there. But it can also be external life factors that we're aware of, what they have going on, like is there exams going on at school? Do they have school training this morning and now they're arriving with us in the evening? So that really comes into relevance in addition to the action or the individual areas of the pitch that we have there. Is it's the broader context, and it's all about who is in front of me. So that's the key piece for relevance that sits at the heart of session design for me.
Yeah.